So good to see you all here, and I hope the weather doesn't make people stay away. It's interesting watching the weather over the years and how people predict the weather. I've watched, I remember growing up as a kid and watching the meteorologists, and they talk so confidently that, this storm is rolling in and this is going to be here. And I was checking my phone, and it says from 5 p.m. today until 10 p.m., 100% chance of rain. There is no chance at all that it's not going to rain, according to the weatherman. I love that, because I think God messes with them. I really do. I think just about the time they get super cocky and super confident, God says, "Oh yeah, just watch this." So we'll see what happens. Maybe they got it right. And I'm not faulting them. I'm amazed how accurate they are. But I just know it's just one of those things that I don't think they're ever going to know 100% for sure, even though they claim they do, because things change. We're going to talk about evil and suffering today. And I'd love for you to have a Bible. If you could grab a Bible, please. If you don't have one, there's one in the pew there in front of you so that you can follow along, and you can be turning that to Psalms chapter 89. There's an outline in the bulletin that you can fill in the blanks. And so if you'll grab that and a pen, and you'll be able to follow along with the message. I want to start with a quote by Richard Dawkins. In his book, River Out of Eden, he says this: "The total amount of suffering per year in the natural world is beyond all decent contemplation. During the minute that it takes me to compose this sentence, thousands of animals are being eaten alive. Many others are running for their lives, whimpering with fear. Others are slowly being devoured from within by rasping parasites. Thousands of all kinds are dying of starvation, thirst, and disease. It must be so. If there ever is a time of plenty, this very fact will automatically lead to an increase in the population until the natural state of starvation and misery is restored. In a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces, and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference." Now, if you don't know who Richard Dawkins is, I read one author that says he is the poster child of Western atheism. He is the most well-known atheist in our country. And he wrote this book, and he wrote The God Delusion, and he has made it his crusade to prove that there is no God. And he claims that the strongest argument against God is the fact that there is suffering and evil in the world. Now, I didn't put this quote up there just to kind of erect the straw man so I can tear it down, although obviously I do disagree with what he said and his observations. But I want to just be honest and look at the fact that there is pain and suffering in the world today. Does that mean that God does not exist? Is it really possible for a loving and caring God to exist and simultaneously there be evil things going on in the world and this God does nothing about that? That's what we're going to talk about today. How can we know if God exists, if there is pain and suffering in the world? So, A, on your outline, is there any limit to suffering? On this point, Mr. Dawkins and I would agree. There is constantly suffering going on in this world. I think about number one, there are earthquakes, volcanoes, tornadoes, tsunami. There's disease and hurricanes. We see quite often in the news about these earthquakes where buildings are destroyed and people are getting hurt and killed and maimed. Uh, the Mount St. Helens, when it erupted in 1980, some of us remember that time. 57 people were killed and 250 people lost their homes in the area, but I remember soot and ash, volcanic ash in the air that spread as far as Colorado. That's where I was living at the time. It spread over a lot of Western America from this national catastrophe. In Oklahoma, we are very familiar with tornadoes. We live in the part of the world that gets more tornadoes than any other place on this planet. I was reading about, and I don't remember this, I wasn't even alive then, but in Woodward, Oklahoma, when the tornado in 1947 hit, there were 782 people injured and 116 people killed. That was an F5 tornado. The tsunami that hit all of the coast around the Bengal Bay, and one place was India that got hit. And I just happened to be there 3.5 years after this hit, and they were still digging out from the tsunami that hit. They say that the tidal waves reached as high as 100 feet tall and wiped out most of the homes on the coast there. Over 647,000 people lost their homes. More than 12,000 people lost their lives in that horrific accident. There's disease. There was Katrina, Hurricane Katrina, and in this terrible disaster, there was 1,836 people that were killed, $81.2 billion in damage done. And these things happen all the time. These natural catastrophes. And then some are not natural. Let's talk about man-made disasters and sufferings. I read a book probably about 14, 15 years ago. This book, The Worst Hard Times, my sister sent it to me. And it was about the Dust Bowl of the 1930s and how people from Oklahoma and Texas and Kansas and eastern Colorado were suffering from these terrible dust storms that would roll through. And it would be so bad that people would get what they called dust pneumonia, which is just dust in your lungs, and it was killing a lot of the babies and a lot of the elderly in that time. And of course, a lot of the livestock died from just their lungs just being caked with dust. Ladies, you did your house cleaning with a shovel back in those days. It was just terrible times. And my parents lived through that time, and they remember it very well. There were people that were starving. I read about people who would pickle tumbleweed and eat it, or yucca root or something like that. It was very difficult times. The men stopped shaking hands because the static electricity was so bad you get shocked every time. So you just didn't shake hands. It was just a terrible time, but that was a man-made disaster. That happened because in the 20s, farmers did not practice good ecology in farming. They were greedy. Farmers were making more than the president was making in the 1920s, and so they just pushed the land too far, and so we caused that disaster ourselves. Here's another man-made disaster that we remember from 2011. Of course, the bombing of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon with our own planes. And aside from the 19 attackers who died, there was also many others that died. 2,974 people died in that tragic accident when the Twin Towers were hit on September 11, 2001. I think I said 11. I'm sorry. 2001 is when that happened. And there's other things that we do to each other. There's domestic abuse. There is divorce. There is betrayal. There's death of loved ones. We suffer so much day in, day out. There is suffering. And so, what is the explanation for pain and suffering? What do we as Christians do with this very difficult subject? Well, I can tell you, some people take the approach that, it's really just a state of mind. It's really not a problem. Pain and illness is kind of a state of mind that we're in. People even try to use Scripture to justify this position. Proverbs 23, verse 7, which says, "For as he thinks within himself, so is he." I'd encourage you to go back and read the context and see what that person is thinking about. And he's saying this is the way he really is. That Scripture gets abused quite a bit. But there is no doubt that the Bible does teach that there is a link between the way we think and our health. Jesus talked about this in Matthew chapter 6, verse 27, when he says, "Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to his life?" We know that worry not only does it not add to life, it actually detracts from it. And so there is this idea that it's just all a state of mind, but that is not true. Suffering and pain is not just a figment of our imagination. These things are very real. So what is the explanation? Well, perhaps we suffer because we sin. That certainly would account for some of it. Hopefully you're in Psalms chapter 89 by now, and if you look with me at verse 30, it says, "If his sons forsake my law and do not walk in my judgment, if they violate my statutes and do not keep my commandments, then I will punish their transgressions with the rod and their iniquity with stripes." We know that initially pain and suffering came into the world because of the sin of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. You can read that account in Genesis chapter 3, where right after they sinned, when they disobeyed God, they were removed from paradise. And they were put in a state where there was hardship and difficulty. And so there is a punishment that comes with sin. And sometimes it is our sin that God sees and God punishes us. Also, sometimes we punish ourselves with our own sin. In Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 19, it says, "Your own wickedness will correct you, and your apostasies will reprove you." How many of you as parents had your child do something that they had disobeyed you, but it hurt them so bad you thought, I don't need to punish them anymore. Their own mistake that they made is punishing them enough. Well, that happens to us too. Sometimes we do things and we receive a punishment for it just because of the sin itself. When Jesus healed the paralytic in John chapter 5, and later he came back and talked to him, he says, "Behold, you have become well. Do not sin anymore so that nothing worse happens to you." When we sin, bad things happen to us. And so, sin can cause us to suffer, but some rationalize suffering by saying, well, maybe God's just not able to stop all the suffering. Perhaps when God created the world, there wasn't that much, but it just gotten so insurmountable. There's so much wickedness in the world that God is not able to stop it anymore. Well, let's talk about that. That would certainly explain how God could be aware of the suffering and yet not do anything about it. The problem with this statement is it's just not true. The God of the Bible is omnipotent. He is all-powerful. There's nothing he can't do. When the rich young ruler came to Jesus and went away sad because he had great wealth, and the disciples said, well, who could be saved? Jesus says, with people this is impossible, but not with God. All things are possible with God. That's Matthew chapter 19, verse 26. We know that in Daniel chapter 3, when they were going to throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fiery furnace, and they told them, says, whether you do this or not, our God is able to save us. Now, whether he does or not, it doesn't matter. We're not going to bow down and worship your image. But they said, our God is able. Our God is able. It's not an issue of God not being able to stop the pain and suffering. And so people say, well, perhaps God is aware, but he just doesn't care. And this would go back to the ancient gods of the Greeks and the Romans. If you've ever taken Greek mythology, you know how the pagan gods were, how they were just indifferent. They were suffering. I don't care. You know, they didn't care about it at all. They were cruel. And yet we know that the God of the Bible is not like that at all. Nehemiah chapter 9 and verse 17, Nehemiah says, "But you are a forgiving God, gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, and abounding in love." And so where are we in this struggle with how can God and suffering coexist? Well, number 4, perhaps God limits himself. Is that a possibility? We know that there are certain things that we come up with, we ask questions about, can God do this? I remember as a kid, and we would think about, well, can God be present and absent at the same time? Well, no, obviously can't. Can he make a mountain so high he can't climb it? Or dig a hole so deep he can't fill it in? Or make a square circle? Or we used to come up with those childish conundrums all the time. There's actually some things, though, in the Bible that limit God, that say he cannot do this. Hebrews chapter 6, verse 18 says it is impossible for God to lie. He can't do that. James chapter 1 and verse 13 says God cannot be tempted. That's impossible. He cannot do that. Habakkuk chapter 1 verse 13 says, your eyes are too pure to approve evil. God cannot approve evil. So who limits God? He does. His own goodness, his own righteousness limits him in what he is capable of doing. The atheist would say, well, God doesn't explain this, nature does. But our comeback to that is God made nature. He designed natural things into it. And so perhaps God built in laws of nature for a reason, for a purpose. Let's turn to the book of Job. Oh, I missed all those other verses, didn't I? That's all right. The sermon's going to be too long anyway. We'll come back and get them later. I was telling Chase, I normally have about 3 pages of notes. I have 6 pages of notes. So you can read the Exodus 3 and the others later on your own. Let's go to Job chapter 38 and verse 4. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who set its measurements, since you know, or who stretched the line on it? Or what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy, or who enclosed the sea with doors, when bursting forth it went out from the womb, when I made a cloud its garment, and thick darkness its swaddling band, and I placed boundaries on it, and set a bolt and doors, and I said, thus far shall you come, but no farther. And here shall your proud waves stop. When God made the world, He designed it where there is natural laws. There are natural things that occur. Our bodies naturally deteriorate. They get old. They get brittle. Our teeth get brittle. Our hair turns gray. Our hands get weak. Our muscles get weak. Our bones get brittle. This is part of nature. God created nature. Can He interrupt that? Yes. He can do so at any time. The Bible records many times when God would interrupt the natural course that something was going to take place. He even stopped the sun one day. He would stop those who were going to die from dying. He stopped disease and illness. God can do so. Well, then how come He didn't stop my loved one from dying? Can you imagine if you were God and you're listening to all these prayers all the time, And what if you granted every single person everything that they prayed for? What would this world be like? There has to be some consistency that God has put in place. The boundaries have to stay the same. Imagine a sport where the out of bounds is only true for some of the players and not for the rest. It doesn't work that way. The rain falls on the just and the unjust. So, we have this suffering and pain, and we also have God. Again, how do we reconcile this? Well, think about this. Is all suffering evil? Is it evil? Is there situations where it's not evil, where it actually, a hardship can produce some good? Well, if it helps you to see a need for your God, I'd say that hardship can serve a purpose. We know this from Scripture. Receiving discipline shows we are God's children. In Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12. Look with me at verse 4. You have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin. And you've forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? But if you're without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Furthermore, we've had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time, as seemed best to them. But he disciplines us for our good, so that we may share his holiness. All discipline, for the moment, seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful. Yet to those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. Therefore, strengthen the hands that are weak and the knees that are feeble, and make straight paths for your feet, so that the limb which is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. Sometimes we receive a discipline from the Lord, and it's not a bad thing. Is it pleasant at the time? Absolutely not. The Bible says so. That is not pleasant to go through. Is it necessary? Yes, it is. It serves a purpose. Even though when we're going through it, we may not understand the purpose. Sometimes God limits what we receive. We know, point 2 here, material comfort blinds us to spiritual needs. In the book of Psalms 119, the longest chapter in the Bible, Psalm 119, and look with me at verse 65. Psalms 119 and verse 65. You have dealt with your servant, O Lord, according to your word. Teach me good discernment and knowledge, for I believe in your commandments. Man, this should be our prayer, shouldn't it? Before I was afflicted, I went astray, but now I keep your word. You are good and do good. Notice what he says there about God. I want to read that again. You are good and do good. Teach me your statutes. The arrogant have forged a lie against me. With all my heart I will observe your precepts. Their heart is covered with fat, but I delight in your law. It is good for me that I was afflicted, that I may learn your statutes. The law of your mouth is better to me than thousands of gold and silver pieces. The psalmist doesn't reveal here what the affliction was that he went through. We get the impression from the last verse that it cost him not only maybe a physical pain, but financial pain. He may have lost something here. But he says, I would rather have your law than thousands of pieces of gold. Thousands of pieces of gold and silver does not add up to being guided by you. He says, it was good for me that I was afflicted. Material possessions can hold us back. And so if we don't receive something that we've asked for or prayed for, it could be a blessing from God. Thirdly, hardships develop perseverance, leading to maturity. James brings this out in his opening verses. James chapter 1. James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. Listen to how James puts it. Consider it all joy, my brothers, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. What an attitude to have about suffering and pain. James says, man, it could be a joy. You can see it as a blessing because this is going to produce in me some endurance. I'm going to learn something from this. And that endurance is going to perfect something in me. It's going to have a good result in me. It's going to help me to be more mature in my faith. Can you imagine telling God, I'm so thankful for my suffering. I'm thankful for an illness that I went through. I'm thankful for an injury that I incurred. Illness can be a blessing if it makes us reconsider God. Suffering can strengthen the character of the sufferer if we will allow it to. Point 4. If God's going to shape us, shaping us into useful vessels involves some poking and some prodding. You're going to love this verse in Jeremiah. I haven't looked at this one in a long time. Came across it this week. Jeremiah chapter 18. And look at verse 1. The word which came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Arise and go down to the potter's house, and there I will announce my words to you. And then I went down to the potter's house, and there he was making something on a wheel. But the vessel that he was making of clay was spoiled in the hand of the potter, so he remade it into another vessel as it pleased the potter to make. You may have seen this in person, or maybe you watched it, where they get the potter's wheel spinning and they will shape something and out of clay, but sometimes the potter's not happy with how that turned out. And they'll squish it back down and they'll start all over again and they'll shape it into something better. Well, God is constantly changing us and shaping us. And as we're going through this process, it's not a pleasant experience. But He's the potter and we're the clay, not the opposite way around. Sometimes we're expecting God to do what we think. We want to shape God to fit what we believe God should be. But it doesn't work that way. You and I, we're the clay in the potter's hands. And it may not be pleasant as we're being poked and prodded and shaped into something that God wants us to be. But it is a necessary kind of pain. Pain and suffering can serve a purpose. And I'm not saying all of them I understand, because I don't. But I'm telling you, God is not obligated just because we pray about something or just because we want all the pain and suffering out of our life. He's not obligated to give us that. Because sometimes He allows us to go through these things because they are needed. Batzel Barrett Baxter made a quote. How many of you know who Batzel Barrett Baxter is? He was a preacher, big name preacher in the church back in the 70s. I believe he died a couple years after I became a Christian, so I never got to meet him. I knew him through cassette tapes. How many of you remember cassette tapes? Okay, all right, yeah. We had some cassette tapes of Batzel Barrett Baxter. He was out of Tennessee. He wrote a lot for the Gospel Advocate. Great brother. Here's what he said. He said, if God promised immunity from suffering to those who follow him, men would serve him out of self-interest. As a kind of cosmic insurance policy, men would become followers of God. It'd be foolish not to do so. If to follow God meant that one would automatically be protected from illness, death, and disappointment of every kind, but this would defeat the real essence of religion, i.e., the earnest and genuine offering of worshipful love and devotion to God. A lot of wisdom there. If everything was rosy and peachy and everything was just wonderful when we become a Christian, well, then we're all just going to become Christians, and maybe that sounds like that's the way it ought to be. No, because it defeats the whole purpose of serving God through the good times and the hard times. That's the whole meaning of it. Another thing that is important to me in my quest to understand God, and most of you know there was a time in my life when I did not believe in God, but something that has really helped me to understand this very subject in a better way is an understanding that the next world helps this world to make a whole lot more sense. When I understand that this is not the end, this is a means to an end, then I understand that this world is going to carry with it some mistreatment. Abraham went through a lot of pain and suffering. And yet in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 10, he says, for he was looking for the city which has foundation, whose architect and builder is God. Just knowing that, looking forward to that, Abraham says, I can endure this that I'm going through right now. Hardship transforms us. It prepares us for what is to come. Philippians chapter 3, verse 21. None of this is in your notes, I know. Our citizenship is in heaven, which also we eagerly wait for a Savior. That makes sense. When we understand that all that we're going through is preparing us for a time when there won't be pain and suffering and death and mourning, it helps us to prepare to appreciate that time so much better. Trouble achieves for us an eternal glory. That's what 2 Corinthians 4 verses 16 and 17 say. For momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. It's worth it if we understand that there is an afterlife. If there's no afterlife, then I'm with Mr. Dawkins. None of this makes sense. But there is an afterlife, then yeah, this makes perfect sense. I have one more question to deal with. Does God fully understand suffering? Some people would say, well, the reason that God doesn't do something is he doesn't really understand what pain and suffering is all about. I think I can answer that with one picture. Yeah, I think God understands suffering. I think he understands it perfectly well. The God who made this whole world and everything that we can see out there and beyond what we can see out there came to this earth, suffered as a human being, died one of the worst deaths a person could ever die, the crucifixion. Yeah, I think our God does understand suffering quite well. And I think he hurts when he sees people suffering, because he knows we bring a lot of it on ourselves, if we're quite honest, our pain and our suffering. He hurts, but we know that it has a purpose. I could preach 100 years of sermons and I could not begin to answer all the questions about pain and suffering. But the Bible gives us hope that suffering has an explanation. God's Word teaches us how to cope with and even how to thrive in the face of adversity. We all suffer. I suffer. I'm not okay. How about you? I'm not okay. I don't want to put up a front that everything is rosy in my life. I'm not okay. I suffer. You suffer as well. And that's why we meet on Sundays, to encourage one another and to offer the invitation, which we're about to do. Maybe you're suffering. Maybe you're hurting about something going on in your life, and you're needing prayers and strength of the church. As Jesus is tenderly calling to you, if you feel like you need to respond in some way, please come as we stand and sing.